Can a driver be penalized for gaining an advantage if the stewards themselves recognize that they did not have control of their car? Are we facing one of the FIA's most embarrassing mistakes in recent years? It all begins in a setting full of tension, the Autodromo Hermanos Rodriguez, a track with extreme altitude, tight curves, and a recent history marked by controversial decisions. But what happened this time was not a simple error of interpretation or a questionable move between drivers. What happened was a direct blow to the integrity of Formula One's sporting decisions. Lewis Hamilton, involved in a direct battle with Max Verstappen, faces one of the most challenging maneuvers of the Grand Prix, braking in turn 4. Both drivers go to the limit, one trying to overtake, the other trying to defend, and in the middle of that millimeter tension, the braking point occurs. Hamilton locks the brakes, enters the corner past the corner, and ends up taking the alternative route, an escape that was not planned, but was inevitable. There was no time to correct, there was no space for a different decision. It was an instinctive reaction to a critical moment. Up to that point, the scene could have been interpreted as a piloting error under pressure. But the real storm begins when the official documents of the FIA stewards are published. And this is where the case explodes. Document 37, signed and sealed by the FIA, bluntly admits that Hamilton had a fully justifiable reason for not following the escape route stipulated by the race director. It is clearly established that his car was going too fast as a result of a brake lock, which made it physically impossible to turn and follow protocol. That is, the FIA recognizes that the driver acted in good faith in an adverse technical situation. Until then, one might think that the case was closed. No action would be taken, as the document also states. However, in an action that defies any regulatory logic, Document 36 published in parallel imposes a 10-second penalty on Hamilton for having gained a lasting advantage outside the track limits. The contradiction is so obvious that it seems like a bad joke. How can the same regulatory body issue two such radically opposing decisions in the same event on the same action with the same pilot? But this is not just a paper inconsistency. This contradiction calls into question the entire chain of logical reasoning behind sporting sanctions in F1. If one document states that Hamilton cannot be required to follow the correct path because it is beyond his control, and the other penalizes him for not returning the position obtained in that same situation, then the structure of interpretation of the regulation has collapsed on itself. The most serious thing is that we are not talking about subjectivities or slow-motion interpretations. We are talking about official statements signed by the same entity in the same race and applied to the same maneuver. The implicit admission of error is present, but camouflaged in bureaucracy. What should have been an objective technical review ended up being an exercise in regulatory contradiction that has put the entire Formula One community on alert. The key is in the ambiguity of the concept of durable advantage. This expression, so common in the FIA regulations, is designed to punish those drivers who, after leaving the track, obtain an objective improvement in their position or time and do not return the advantage obtained. But what happens when that advantage was neither sought nor generated voluntarily? Should the regulations be applied with the same weight when the action is a consequence of an unavoidable technical failure? This is where analysts begin to divide. There are those who maintain that the FIA cannot enter the field of judging intentions, but only facts. For them, if Hamilton overtook Verstappen off the track and did not return the position, the penalty is appropriate, regardless of whether or not he could have avoided it. Sports justice, under this approach, must be blind to the circumstances. But there is another block of experts, including several former commissioners and retired pilots, who defend an opposite view. Context does matter. In this case, the advantage was the result of a brake lock caused by specific technical conditions: high altitude, overheating of the discs, low grip, and racing pressure. A combination that, according to these experts, should have been interpreted as a forced act, not punishable. What is truly at stake here is not Hamilton's position. It is the criterion that will be used in all future maneuvers that involve unforced errors or emergent actions outside the pilot's control. If it is established that an action can be sanctioned even when the commissioners recognize that it was not deliberate, the door opens to penalizing any incident according to visible consequences and not according to its real cause. The regulations of Formula One have always worked as a delicate balance between letter and spirit. Standards are written to be interpreted judiciously, adapted to context, and applied consistently. But what happened in Mexico 2025 breaks that harmony. The FIA wrote the context, understood it, and still decided to ignore it to apply a mechanical, almost robotic sanction. That decision has aroused deep fear among the teams. Because if the stewards are capable of imposing sanctions despite recognizing that the technical conditions invalidated compliance with the rule, who guarantees that the next penalty is not even more absurd, more arbitrary, or more dangerous for the integrity of the sport? Furthermore, this debate does not occur in a vacuum. It comes in the middle of a season already marked by controversial changes, controversial technical decisions, and an intense battle for the championship between multiple teams. Every point counts. Every decision by the stewards has the potential to alter the destiny of races, drivers, and manufacturers. It's not just a question of sporting justice, it's a question of competitive legitimacy. And if legitimacy begins to erode from the regulations themselves, then the damage can be much deeper than what appears in a simple table of results. The difference between an opinion and proof lies in the data. And in the case of Lewis Hamilton at the 2025 Mexican Grand Prix, the telemetric data is devastating, because they not only reinforce the narrative that the driver did not have absolute control of the vehicle at the time of the maneuver, but they crudely expose the weakness of the FIA's sanctioning argument. When we talk about telemetry in Formula One, we are not talking about assumptions or subjective impressions. We are talking about precise information obtained directly from the car's sensors: braking force, pedal pressure, steering wheel angle of rotation, speed, mass transfer, brake temperature, and instant adhesion of the tire to the asphalt. That data, captured down to the millisecond, doesn't lie. In the key lap of the controversy, Hamilton's telemetry reveals late braking, yes, but also a total lockup in the front wheels caused by a combination of environmental and technical factors that make the Autodromo Hermanos Rodriguez a particularly hostile scenario. The extreme altitude of more than 2,200 meters above sea level decreases air density, which affects two critical variables: brake cooling and downforce. With less oxygen, brake systems operate at higher temperatures because cooling capacity is drastically reduced. As the discs and pads heat up, the risk of losing braking sensitivity and causing stalling increases exponentially. And to this is added the lower aerodynamic load on the front axle, which makes it even more difficult to support the car when entering the curve. In conditions like this, Hamilton enters turn 4 fighting not only against Verstappen, but against physics itself. When you apply the brakes, the wheels lock, the car does not respond, and what follows is a straight trajectory that cannot be corrected even by perfect reflexes. The steering wheel is turned. The pilot is reacting, but the car does not respond. Escape is not a choice. It's the only way out. And the most relevant thing, that sequence is registered. The sensors clearly show the exact moment at which the car stops obeying. There is no path adjustment, no clipping intention. Just a mechanical fight against a car that has crossed the adhesion limit. Furthermore, an analysis of the total time of the maneuver reinforces the idea that Hamilton did not gain a structural advantage. Although he overtook Verstappen in the process, the total sector time was almost identical to previous laps. There was no real-time gain that could translate into a sustainable competitive advantage. In other words, the gain was positional but not strategic. And that is a fundamental difference. This was not a simple racing incident, nor was it a controversial maneuver between two elite pilots. It was rather a moment of institutional rupture, an episode where a fissure that has been forming for years within the regulatory structure of Formula One was exposed. The case of Lewis Hamilton in Mexico 2025 will be remembered as more than just a controversial sanction. It will be remembered as the exact point where the regulations and their application collided head-on with the technical reality of sport. Because when the body that dictates the rules admits in writing that a driver acted in a justified manner and at the same time sanctions him for that same action, the logic that underpins the entire sports system is compromised. And this is not an isolated problem. It is the crystallization of a crisis of confidence that has been brewing for years. Inconsistent decisions, changing criteria depending on the circuit or the panel of commissioners, penalties without clear public explanation, and now, even documents that contradict each other within the same race. All of this has built a climate of skepticism, inside and outside the paddock, that the FIA can no longer ignore. The same thing is happening now. And while there's no championship on the line, there's something even more important at stake: the legitimacy of every future outcome. Because if the community begins to believe that the result of a race can be altered by incoherent decisions, it will no longer be just a sport. It will be a scripted show, a story without internal consistency. The Hamilton case is not only about whether or not he should have returned the position to Verstappen. It is about whether Formula One can continue to allow itself to operate under a regulatory structure that contradicts its own technical logic. It deals with whether decisions on the track will continue to be guided by subjective interpretation or by objective technical principles. And above all, it is about whether the drivers who put their lives at risk lap after lap can fully trust the judgment of those who judge them. Let me know in the comments what you think about all this.